Today, I'd like to talk to you about my personal philosophy. I just realized that in all my want to purvey to you guys the quality of self care, the philosophy proven by science and history, and by practical application, I've been caught guilty of the exact same thing that I really kind of advise against. And in this way, we all grow and understand new things. I have taken the humanness out of my self care model, thinking that that is what gives the value to the process. However, I realized that I am the one that gives the value to that process. And I really wanted to share with you guys how I view things and what I think of self care, and a little bit more about the human being behind the pursuit, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, I would say what sums up my philosophy or my belief in a very concise way would be I refuse to believe that our best is a failure. This is a belief I've had for a very, very long time. When I was going through school, and I wasn't the best at school, not the brightest, essentially, and I was told that I would fail this and fail that and never amount to anything. And as you can imagine, that's enough to make life challenging for you. And I said to myself one day in my mind that I refused to be I refused my best to be seen as a failure. And so I took on life with this thought process. And again, later on, when I made it to college and I started studying, which is supposed to be an impossibility for me, I decided to keep with this kind of thinking, modify it in a way of saying, well, you know what, I refuse to let my best be the limitation of my clients. After graduating school and moving on through the industry, I again restated this belief in the way of saying that, you know what, I want to find uh, what the best exercise is, the perfect exercise. Always, again, looking at things from the perspective of what is the point that is failing in this process? Why am I not able to help every client I have? Why do they struggle with progress? Why do they give up? These kind of things weighed heavily on my mind. In this way, I started pursuing other avenues of health. Maybe fitness was not the center of the world, and maybe there is something more out there that will help improve this health process, this fitness process. And so I went to the different health practices. After doing that for a few years, I started to see the limitations to each of these practices, and that they too have a spot where they are having a hard time helping people. This generally revolved around the part where the person has to take on the challenge and bring it into the house or the lifestyle or the home, from work, these kind of things. From that experience, I started to see the overall arching limiting factor of health, how we practice it, was the fact that it stopped at the doors of the clinic or doors of the gym or whatever you have there. And then when it went into real life, it wasn't translating as well. There again was a limitation. Why is this thing there? Shouldn't health be carried through life? These things started to weigh heavily on my mind and on my heart, I guess. And so I continued to pursue this. I did a bunch of different certifications. I pushed through personal barriers, again, not wanting to be the limitation to my clients. And they were tough. They were very hard for me personally to grow through, but I had a greater goal essentially, so I did that. Um, I should mention, through my own personal challenges, I did take the standpoint of not just jumping out of the hardship, but more studying it and sitting in it and waiting there so that I could find essentially uh, what caused it or how it came to be or what is it about that situation that allowed it to happen. And in this way, uh, that it would never happen again. Essentially, that was my way of thinking about it. Um, Through that process of studying and now moving on, taking more time to see that the greatest practitioners in any aspect of health have this ability to push past that barrier of the clinic door and make um, a change in the person's lifestyle. And if this was possible, and this is the limitation of most of the health practices, then what is it that they're doing that allows this to happen? So again, I went back to looking at different training styles, methods, and health practices, and who are these practitioners? And I went and sat down and talked with a few of them to see how they're doing this. And the link here I see mainly as the ability to influence a person's uh, character in the way of how they view taking on life. This again is very challenging if you spend very little time with a person. In fact, if you don't really bridge their way of viewing life with either being so um, kind of looked up to in a way of setting a standard where the person views their um, goal kind of in the practitioner, that they will get them there and that kind of thing, then we see this transformation of more change in lifestyle. Outside of that, big life challenges will also increase the ability for somebody to seek this kind of change. Being stuck with a problem for a long period of time, generally people get very serious about finding a solution and getting out of that situation. So they will generally travel the health spectrum trying to find this um, golden thread, if we want to call it something. And in this way, I too started to pursue this thing to really figure out what it was. I then hit upon the idea of self care, then reevaluating things and seeing maybe the limitation is that um, the person is not particularly taking care of themselves. I did realize that when people get into their home environment, that there becomes a very big challenge here with the translation. Hence, I started doing in-home training and exercise and therapy, that kind of thing, to see, well, what are these limiting factors? Again, after that process and more study and more research and all that kind of stuff, I really began to view things a lot differently. That even though these pieces of health that we generally pursue separately, they all have an origin, and this origin has an original form. And this original form, despite the era or age, has always been the one found in self care. There's a lot of pieces to the self care puzzle, essentially, but with all that understanding, I wanted to give you some information on how I came to the more or less end conclusion of this believing a person's best does not end in failure. Uh, I started to see that when a person is in a situation where they're not able to grow, this is where injury happens. And this injury uh, is not just on the physical level, it will be on the mental, physical, and emotional level. Like I always say, I believe this to be an absolute truth. This injury essentially stops the person from growing towards their potential. When somebody is not growing towards their potential, they are stuck. If they are stuck, then a loop must happen. Life will put the person back in the same situation that they need to overcome by growth. This inevitably will happen in any shape and form, whether it be a tough situation that you're always faced to have to make that decision about, or being stressed out and being in the place where you're faced with this challenge that the rest of your personality has actually outgrown, but this is the limiting factor, so life has a way of repeating it. I believe that then the perfect exercise or action when it comes to lifestyle changes from exercise um, becomes one of outgrowing one's old self. I find this challenging to kind of put into a single action, but eventually I came to the conclusion that there has to be an experience. This experience is essentially of the person experiencing the part of themselves that they view is missing or don't even know is missing. This would be confidence to the shy person. This would be strength to the person that views himself weak. This would be, in my case, again, education to the person that thinks that they are not smart or has been told that several times. You see, we have to surpass these things, and then our health will rise because we're not resisting actually who we are. We are actually pursuing exactly who we are. And in this way, we create a kind of unity or harmony within ourselves, and then we are able to interact with life appropriately. I found that this kind of experience that I'm talking about, which I would call the personal environment of health, becomes one of letting all feelings and emotions and experiences in, because we do block out the things eventually that are what we call triggers. When we block them out so effectively that they cannot be ignored because the subconscious will make it a fact of being acknowledged because it is part of our growth and we do need to overcome it, then we will get this actual triggered feeling. And this is the fact that we have not appropriately been guided on the process of unifying ourselves against this challenge. So my belief and my philosophy is again really one of that our best cannot be a failure. There is a way for us to improve and overcome things. It is not actually about being perfect, but it is about understanding what we're capable of and living up to that accomplishment. There have been several models of this growth aspect indicated in psychology and philosophy, and essentially in all health practices. The idea is that we get the person back in a place where they are guiding their own health and making decisions that accomplish their ideal self, essentially. So this is a little insight into myself, my passion, the thing behind self-care, my beliefs, and what I have pursued for over 10 years or so, and traversing it through the ups and downs and forwards and backs of the process of being very dedicated to one thing. Thank you for listening. And if this thing does resonate with you, if you find any value in it at all, please feel free to let me know. That's always encouraging because when you're doing something that's kind of new and kind of um, emerging, if you will, then the amount of support is not as much as if you did something that was more common. Anyway, that all being said, I thank you for listening to my story and my understanding and my beliefs, and hope that you've gained something from the insight that I've brought across. And um, hopefully, this gives you a little bit more value to your self care. Feel free to contact me as well at noelm at designfitness.ca. Thank you so much.